Hey, this is Joel with American Giants. I thought I would do a video today about buying a Muffler Man. I get so many emails every week of, hey, I'd love to have a Muffler Man. How do I get one? And I just thought it would be a good idea to do like a complete buyer's guide in how to buy a Muffler Man and everything you need to know that comes along with that. I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never seen the demand so high and the interest so great now that we are in 2026 with the centennial of Route 66, and I just get so much interest in people who want to buy a Muffler Man. And that's one thing American Giants does. We're here for you for all those things, to buy, to sell. We coach you with restoration, and also with history. That's a really big part of it, all the historical research behind these giants. So we'll dive into it today in today's video. People are really interested in the giants. We've just seen this massive resurgence in the last 15 years. Each year, it's like there's more and more inquiries about them. Social media, I'm seeing a lot more focus on Muffler Men on all social media platforms that involve, old cars, old gas stations, vintage signs, vintage roadside stuff. They're just becoming ever and ever more increasingly popular, which is really good to see. And I also want to take a look at the statistics. Let's look. We can gauge all this by the sales of Muffler Men. We can look at the past years and see how many sales there were compared to Muffler Man being sold today. And if you look at the charts here, you'll notice that 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006, all these years, relatively low sales, always under 5 a year. And these were just mostly collectors or people who wanted a Muffler Man, would find one that was available and they would buy it. And this could be businesses, but back then it was often just, somebody that wanted one. And maybe they didn't own a business. They just had, a regular house with a backyard and they wanted the Muffler Man. Back then you could do that. You could afford to just want one of these and get it. But these days the prices have increased, and so it's mostly business owners who get these guys. Right around 2014, 2015, 2016, we start to see a change. This is all of a sudden more Muffler Men are being sold every year, and this is a result of a number of different things. But people, because of social media posts and YouTube videos, and all of these things, the awareness of these giants was growing. And there was also an increased interest on Route 66 around that time as well. And so around 2018, we took down the Asheville Indian in Asheville, North Carolina. I also rescued a Muffler Man out of Canada. And those both went to Mark Klein. And so that actually impacts this story because it was at that point that he made a 20-foot version mold, and he had a 14-foot version mold already that he'd been using for years. So some of the remakes early on, like starting as early as like 2009, were coming from Mark, but now all of a sudden you can make the 20-footers, and this really changed everything. And so you start to see those numbers. You notice the blue color there on top. That represents the remakes that are sold every year versus the originals there at the bottom of the graph. But you see the numbers just really starting to ramp. Of course, COVID, there was a drop, but then it picked right back up and continued up. And 2025 was just this massive year of over 20 Muffler Men being sold, and more than half of those were remakes versus an original. So really some really dynamic things happening and changing in the Muffler Man world versus sales. And you can see that these days, business owners are getting very interested in having a Muffler Man at their attraction or at their business, and that's why we're seeing this trend. As far as prices go, we're past the point where most private collectors can afford them, so it's mostly businesses. So at this point in time, these just aren't past relics of roadside Americana. These are marketing machines, right? So they are still working and being used for the exact reason that they were made in the 1960s. International Fiberglass made most of these to go to businesses that wanted to get the family car to stop, and so they could make more money. And that's what it is too. Maybe it's not all about the money these days. It's about, the attraction and enjoying yourself on Route 66. But each of the places, obviously, that have these want you to stop and experience what they have. And that's fine. That's good. That's how it all works. Okay. So before we go into all the details, let's look at Muffler Men and the versions that if you have a business or you want a Muffler Man, the first thing I ask people when they contacted me is, well, what have you seen and what do you like? Like, what's in your head? And they always have a vision of something that they want. All right. So the versions that are out there are the Snurd. This is the Alfred Newman, goofy looking guy. The classic Paul Bunyan Lumberjack. They made a ton of these, more of these than anything else, and they were the first Muffler Men that were ever made. And so I think today there's still over 50 originals left. You have the Chief. You have the Indian Brave version. These were both heavily used by car dealerships back in the day. You have a bow tie version that had a bow tie. Of course, the Standard, which looked just like that except without the bow tie. And then you also have a 14-foot version Bunyan. If you couldn't afford or have space for the big 20-footer, you could buy a smaller one. They didn't sell very well, though. So there's fewer of those originals left today. Lots of custom international fiberglass jobs where they would take different parts and pieces of their giants and make you something custom, like Jesse James territory and Sullivan back in the 60s ordered the Jesse James figure. He was really cool. He's still around today. He's being restored, actually. What's another good one? The one in Helper, Utah. That guy was a custom job. He has a pickaxe, he's got a unique hat, he's got these tool pouches on his belt. He was a custom job made by International Fiberglass. And so you still see this today. You can either buy an original custom job, or with remakes, you can make your own custom giant. So it's very much the same model as we saw back in the 60s. They made a cowboy version. Phillips 66 heavily used these. Big John's, he's not made by International Fiberglass, but Big John statues, we do have molds for those, and it's the largest statue that you can get. There's the Texaco Big Friend, Uniroyal Gal, those are very popular. The Viking, extremely rare. Carpet Vikings, I love these guys. And then, of course, the Waving Giant, also very rare. And so these were, almost all of these, except for the Big John, were all made by International Fiberglass. And the interesting thing is they have different heights and different looks. So, one would fit your business better than another, and that's the beauty. You can look at all the pictures like I just showed and kind of see, oh, well, this is really kind of the best fit for me. You can make so many variations out of these by swapping heads or swapping pants or different things to make your custom character, or find an original that you like. So there's really two paths you can take when you want a giant. The first path is you can go original with an International Fiberglass Muffler Man made back in the 60s, or you can go with a remake, one of the ones that you make it custom for your needs, or buy a remake that somebody else made and they don't need it anymore. So let's talk about historical and original. Why would you want an original Muffler Man? The pluses are that it's historical, it's got loads of history, it's got a whole story behind it, complete with, in most cases, black and white photos and a trail across the United States, in some cases, all the different places it's been. And you know that it was made by International Fiberglass in their shop in the 60s, and that's just cool. So there's a value there because it's an original. Also, there's a connection to Muffler Man to Route 66, and some of the originals were put on Route 66. So there's just this nostalgia about an original Muffler Man and having one that a lot of collectors take very seriously, as well as business owners. They're collectible. They're more collectible than the remakes, and it's just like anything else, like old signs. If you have an old Texaco sign and you want one, you can either buy a new one or you can buy a vintage one. And, you could, of course, go to Ned in his garage, and he's, making these signs and repainting them, and then he's putting fake rust on it and scratching them up, and making them look vintage. And that's cool for your, maybe your den, but like, okay, this is just a remake, as opposed to, a real Texaco sign that's got history and was at a gas station at one time, like the one we have at the American Giants Museum. And that just adds a lot more realness to the collection. And so there's a demand, obviously, for originals. All right. But remember, original doesn't always mean easier, and we'll discuss that more here in a little bit. Originals are much harder to get. Of course, a remake, you just order it and it's made and you've got it. An original, you have to search or find somebody that's willing to sell. That's one thing that American Giants does, is we assist buyers with buying originals. And we have a website. We often, a few times a year, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, we'll put up a Muffler Man for sale that somebody is selling, and we'll do it through our website and we'll find a buyer. So you can always look on there and see, here's an original, and it's kind of like you make offers, like a mini auction, so to speak, and we basically help the seller find a buyer for that Muffler Man. But they're not always available when you want them. All right, so it's a little bit hard to find them. You also can search for one on your own, but this is like something we do full time, and I can tell you from experience, it's fun, but it takes months and months, if not years, of hard work to look and find an original Muffler Man, especially the ones that no one knows about. You can go to your local Muffler Man that's been there for 50 years and ask them if they want to sell it, but chances are they're going to say no. If you do happen to get an original Muffler Man, say you buy one off our website that's for sale, and you're the top bidder and you win it, and then there's a lot of things to consider at that point that you should consider actually before you do that, and let's go through them. This is all to do with an original Muffler Man. Often they have a steel structure inside that's original from International Fiberglass. Not all the Giants did, but a lot of them do, and these are normally rusted out and they're very heavy. So take that into consideration with a move. I recently found an original in Albany, and it had all the steel in it, and it was almost impossible for us to load it in the truck. And when we got it to the shop at Regiant, which I'll talk about Regiant later, it was very hard. We had to cut all that out, and you almost never can reuse this stuff because it's rusted and it's old. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, the brackets that hold the Giant together, normally at the waist, these are normally all rusted out. If you ever see Giants that the waist isn't quite lining up, then I remember the Bunyan in Atlanta, Illinois, a few years ago had a gap there. That's because these brackets are rusting out, and the wind is shifting the Giant now, and it's being held together over the years by less and less brackets. So these normally always need to be replaced. Normally new brackets are made and fiberglassed in. You need to take into consideration fiberglass damage, cracks, and breaks. These all need to be repaired. The fiberglass is 50 years old, so oftentimes it needs to be reinforced and strengthened. And then in many, many cases, you have Giants that just have missing pieces. Maybe you were buying it and it's missing a foot. These broke off a lot. Or it's missing an arm, or in some cases even a head. Then you have to remake those parts from molds if they exist. So that's something to take into consideration. Previous patch jobs and work. This is actually a big deal to think about, because back in the 60s and mostly in the 70s and 80s, these guys were falling apart and they were patched up. And we almost never see a nice patch job. It's normally somebody who barely knows what they're doing with fiberglass, and they've made a real mess of things. I remember the Chevron Man that we found up in Maine, and it went down to a winery in Texas, and the rear end of this guy had been completely patched up, and they'd done a horrible job. And so it took us a lot of work to completely remake that and get it back to looking new. So look for all the patch jobs and the horrible messes that somebody has made in the past. Keep in mind that on the original, you're going to need to sand it all down, back down to like the gel coat, get all those layers of paint off, and it's all going to need to be sanded and then reprimed and painted. So that's a big job. That's what most people don't like to do, and those who do restoration, that takes the longest amount of time. And then always keep in mind that on the originals, you have to go pick them up. You have to transport them either to your place or to where they're going to get restored. And so take that into consideration, the cost of that. People like Mark Klein and Giant and myself, we all do hauling at different times of the year for people. So you can ask us about quotes and prices. I'm not going to talk about a whole lot of prices in this video because every situation is different, and as time goes on, prices change as well. So reach out to us, but take it into consideration that I'm going to buy this giant, but then there's going to be a cost unless I do it myself, and even in that case, you're going to pay to have it moved. After restoration, you've got your original Muffler Man. He's been fully restored. You got to take a few things into account. You have to transport the giant to a new location now from the restoration shop. This is a big one. Think about zoning and permissions. This varies in every town. Some places you'll go and you'll have no issues at all with putting up your giant. No one's going to say a thing. You put it up next to your business, your tire store in a small rural town in America, no problem. Everybody loves it. The mayor comes out and thinks it's great. But you could go to the next town over, completely different story. They're going to ask you to take it down the next week. So it's always best to do your research. Tell the people, the city council, whatever it needs to be, what you're doing, and get the proper permissions. Go through the process. Unfortunately, this is not the same in every town. It varies widely from town to town. In big cities, it's even more important to do your research. I've had people that have contacted me. We've gotten 80% through the process of getting like a Muffler Man built, a new one. And all of a sudden they get to that point where they realize that the city is not going to let them do this, and they just have to bail on the whole thing, or move to a different location that's going to allow you to have one. Cities like Tulsa, they've actually, because Mary Beth has now put up 5 giants in Tulsa, there's like a special system, an application you go through just to get your Muffler Man up. So the city actually recognizes it's a Muffler Man, and there's a special classification for that. This is a problem that's been brewing since the very beginning. This was a huge problem for International Fiberglass when they were making these in the 60s, but every town was different, and some considered it a sign and some didn't consider it a sign, and there was just so many stories. If you look at old newspaper clippings of these guys, it's just full of legal fights. So do your research, contact your town before you start putting any money into this, or even get very far in conversations with us. Figure out what your town will and will not allow you to do. On an original, you're going to need to take in consideration, what am I going to paint this guy? Is it going to look original? And we can help you with that. We can tell you what your giant would have looked like originally, or you may want to do your custom paint job. For example, the Viking that we have at the museum, that is actually on loan from another collector, and they didn't choose to paint that original. They did their own custom job. It's an airbrush job done by Kurt Robinson, and it is very, very detailed and unique, but it's not original, and that's what they wanted. So everybody's different, so consider what kind of paint job you want, and you can talk to us about what paint jobs were original, and we can coach you in that. You're going to need to decide what it will hold in its arms. Is it an axe? Is it a special item that can be created? We've done a lot of different things. Mark Klein has made different things. I know that there's, a giant that holds a toothbrush. There are giants that hold wrenches or wine bottles. Of course, mufflers and axes is what the originals normally held, but you get to choose, and custom items can be made. Also, after the restoration, you're going to need, and transportation, you're going to need to set this guy up. So take into consideration what's local as far as sky lifts or sky tracks or cranes. At the American Giants Museum, we always put these up with a big crane. It's the easiest, but you're going to need to take that into consideration. Also, these guys need to go on a platform in most cases. Now, if you're in a parking lot or something, maybe you can bolt it through the asphalt or the concrete. We recommend concrete. And normally we pour, at the museum, all of our giants are on pedestals, and we bolt them right down into that. Another thing you're really going to need to think about is the internal structure. Okay, this is a steel structure that needs to go in the Muffler Man, and all these ones at the museum and the other ones that we've helped set up, they all have internal structures, or really should have internal structures. Like all the ones Mary Beth has, they have a lot of high winds in Tulsa, so you do not want to set these up without big, beefy steel pipes inside. And that's something that Mark Klein does. He has his own system, and then Regiant, they also slightly different, but they have an internal structure. So unless you're planning on bolting your guy, standing him on the ground and bolting him up against a building, which you could do. You could basically take his shoulders and bolt him to the side of your building. If you're not going to do that, then you should have an internal in him so he doesn't come down in the windstorm or something like that. So your big question is, and I've gone over this a little bit, but who's going to restore this? Okay, you can do it yourself. You're going to save the most money there, or finding like a local fiberglass boat shop in your town. You could explore that. You may save a little money, but also you are dealing with either yourself who hasn't done this before, or a local shop in town or body shop that's never done this. So the outcome can vary, and you don't know which direction that's going to go. As far as the main guys doing restoration, Regiant is kind of known for restoring originals. That's their specialty. They are, in my opinion, the best in the business for restoring an original Muffler Man, and he's going to look like a museum piece when he's done. Look at Lee Woods and that Texaco Big Friend in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Just a work of art. Look, incredible restoration. So these guys are the best in the business. The cons with them are time. That's not their full-time job. They do it kind of on the side. So you're looking at a much longer, lengthy process. Probably the fastest you're going to get something out of Regiant is 6 months, and it's much more likely to be a year and a half before you get your giant restored. They just take a long time to do things. They do a very good job, though. Another thing with Regiant is the communication. They are not going to be as prompt as responding. They're not sitting by their phones. It's not their full-time job, right? So you may contact them to see how things are going. It might be a little while before you hear back from them. But they do good work, and I've known these guys. This was actually American Giants Restorations when we started, but then they created their own company, and now I'm all focusing on the museum and the videos and the history and helping people buy and sell. That's kind of my niche now. You have Big Man Studios in Virginia. This is run by a guy named Chris. He's somebody I used for the cowboy that I pulled out of the woods in Macon. He did a lot of fiberglass work, a lot of major restoration. And he often works in connection with Mark Klein, who's another option. But Mark mostly does the remakes. So Mark doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time with restorations. Chris does restorations and all that fiberglass repair, and Chris is very good at clear coating things. And Mark does paint. Not quite the museum piece you're going to get out of Regiant, but these guys are going to be faster than Regiant for sure, because this is their main job. This is what they're doing all week. You also have Bell Plastics in Hayward, California. These guys have some really high-end molds. They have really good quality molds. They also rely on another company to do the restorations, so a little bit more of that waiting game. But they're a little bit more, they're going to answer the phone a little more often. If you're on the West Coast, that's a big advantage to using Bell Plastics. They're way out there. You don't have to haul the guy as far. It seems like most of the requests and interests I get for people who want a Muffler Man, though, is Central to East Coast. So Regiant, Big Man Studios, and Mark Klein are kind of the go-to people for that. All right, so we've covered all the nuances of the original Muffler Man. Now let's talk about remakes. Why would you want to go new? What is better about a new Muffler Man as opposed to an old one like that one? That's a complete wreck and needs a full restoration, which it got. Okay, so some of the big things with going new: structural integrity, fresh fiberglass, brand new resin. Everything's new on your Giant. You know, there's no weak spots unless it was poorly made. Everything is brand new. You can also customize this guy right from the start. So you go through the different styles, which we talked about. You pick which one you want, or a combination of which ones you want, and that's what you're going to get. And so it's really easy to do custom work. This is something that Mary Beth in Tulsa has done a lot of. If you look at Buck Adams and Stella and Cowboy Bob, they're all custom. They're all exactly the way she wanted them designed, and they fit her brand perfectly, or the business that they were made for. There's differences and some improvements to design that's been made. Like, for example, Bell Plastics, the molds have been made a lot more with modern technology. You also have, like, Mark Klein, the ones he makes, he often fiberglasses everything together. So where International Fiberglass made things to bolt together so they could be taken apart and shipped, often Mark will fiberglass the neck and the waist all together, so it's very solid structurally. Now, he can still make things in pieces if you want for transportation, but at request and by default, he will normally fiberglass everything together. So it's more durable, it's stronger, but you can't take it apart later if you want to. New ones are often lower in cost. They're not going to cost you as much in most cases as an original. But the good thing is they look identical to the originals, so they're almost the same thing, unless you do a custom job and it's obvious that this is something unique. You could have an original, or you could have Mark make you a remake that looks just like an original Bunyan, for example. So it's the same exact face, torso, and pants. Let's talk about pricing a little bit. Cost has gone way, way up. I remember when I first started doing this, you could find one on eBay, or Roadside America used to advertise them back then for owners, and you could buy them. They generally sold for $5,000 a piece, and those days are long, long gone. The Uniroyal gals and the big friends, the oil-related giants, like I recently found a Tulsa oil giant up near Boston. These are worth significantly more because they have all that oil history, and they were used by oil companies back in the day. So even in their unrestored condition, they go for often a lot more money than a brand new remake. So buy new is often way cheaper, but then again, remember, you don't have any of that history behind it if you want that. I'm not going to go into specifics on pricing in this video for a number of different reasons. It varies greatly compared to what style of giant you're getting, whether it's original or it's a remake. The remakes all kind of stay kind of close together, and then the price can go up if you add like custom hats and custom items they hold. The originals vary a lot more because there's some versions like a Texaco Big Friend or the Uniroyal Gal that are just a lot more money than, say, a Bunyan. But the prices are always changing, and so are the prices of restoration and making the new ones. So I'm not going to talk about specifics because they won't age very well with this video. So if you're interested in pricing, of course, after we go through everything else, that's one of the big topics is, what's in the budget. And you definitely want to think about that. As far as going through the different parts of the giant, you need to consider what your favorites are. There's the Bunyan head, there's the chief head, the snurred head, the waving giant head, the brave head, and the standard head. So these are really your options as far as heads, especially when we're talking about remakes here. This is all stuff you need to think about if you're doing a remake. What's my favorite head? Then you have legs to choose from. You've got the Bunyan style legs. Notice these are tucked in at the top of the boot, or you can do the standard style legs that the pant leg goes all the way down to the top of the shoe. There's also an Indian style leg that has a moccasin on it. And then the Bunyan also has like these suspender buttons normally on the top. And that's another thing to consider with what style legs you want. As far as the torso goes, it's pretty much one basic torso, although keep in mind that the Indian has a raised arm to wave. And so that's a modification you can have. Mark Klein has the raised arm mold for the Indian, and Bell Plastics has the Mr. Bendo style mold. So that's something to consider if you really like those rare raised arm. But most versions are just the classics pose, and so the torso pretty much works with everything. And then when it comes to things they can hold, it's the muffler and the axe were the original items that these giants held, and both of those can be made. But you could also have your giant hold a sign. He could hold a tire like our Phillips 66 guy in Atlanta. And then, of course, there's a whole host of custom items, wrenches, spatulas, toothbrushes. We talked about this a little bit already. And then hats. There's a cowboy hat and a lot of different custom hats, or even unique original hats that existed. So you kind of need to figure out what you want there. Paint jobs, the traditional normally comes with the price that's quoted, but if you want like a detailed paint job, like a checkered shirt or something like that that's unique, that's going to cost you more because it takes more time to paint. Also like the Gemini Giant, when it was painted at Regiant, it's a metal flake gold. It's very unique. That's going to cost a lot more for that paint job, but they wanted to restore it back to Gemini Giant original, so that's why they did that. Everybody uses automotive paint with a clear coat. This has UV protection built in, and they last, of course, a lot longer than house paint, which, believe it or not, some people do paint their giants with something they buy from Home Depot. We don't recommend that. It doesn't last very long at all and looks terrible when it's coming off. Also keep in mind that the weather is brutal on these guys, so even with automotive paint, after 7 years, you're going to start to see spots that are the sun is starting to get through. So a really, really good clear coat is vitally important to extend that life. Now this part is really important. New builds, if you want to make a new one, those are limited to what molds have been made, okay? So a pushcart Tony giant, Texaco Big Friend, Santa, they do not exist. No molds have been made of those, so if you want one of those giants, you need to find an original. But Uniroyals, a classic Bunyan, the standard Muffler Man, a Snurd, the Cowboy, the Chief, the Brave, waving giants, as well as the 14-foot Bunyan, and the Mark Klein Soda Jerk custom ones he does, and the Big Johns with the grocery bags, those all have molds that have been made. So if you want any of those, if you want a new one, you have to choose from those or a combination of those. The other ones simply don't exist. You have to go original. Everybody I know that's gone through this process and got a Muffler Man standing has never regretted it. You know, I know like Aaron, my friend in Galva, Illinois, did all that work. He restored his own. He put up that Viking. It was worth every penny to him. And you got the guys in East Troy at Gus's, that is part of their brand now. So remember, these giants often become the icon of your business, maybe even the town, and is just something that everybody starts recognizing with your brand. And so many businesses actually use the image of their Muffler Man in their advertising and even on their products. So take the money into consideration, but remember it's often well worth the cost once you do it. And the sooner the better, because as we all know, every year prices seem to go up. So doing something now would probably be a better idea than doing it in 2028. And then, of course, always keep American Giants in mind. We're here to help. Whether you want an original and help tracking one down, we can help you do that. Or maybe you want to go with a new one. We'll go through all the basics of the look you want, and then we often put you in touch with either Regiant or Bell Plastics or Mark Klein, and let it go from there. But we're here to help with the whole process. Unfortunately, I probably missed a few key points in this video, so that's what emails and phone calls are for. We're happy to talk to you about anything that we missed or questions you still have. We have a massive database of historical pictures. I have a lot of information on international fiberglass, so if you're really into the history and details and getting things right or finding something very rare, we can help with that as well. So that is the big picture of what it's like to dive into the Muffler Man world and start considering if you want to have one. This has been a great video to wrap your head, I hope, to wrap your head around what it will take. And when you talk to us, you'll have a good idea of what we need to know to help you go further.